Hiya. Hiya, if you just join in, welcome. Do say hello in the live stream chat if you're just tuning in now. It would be lovely to hear from you. Happy Saturn day. Hope you're having a fab weekend thus far. The moon's in Leo right now. Great time to have fun. Thank you if you're tuning in. Hope everyone is well. Happy Saturn day. I've been doing lots and lots of chores today. I'm finally done and I'm ready to bring you this stream, which I wanted to do last night actually, but I was just feeling really tired. So I'm sorry if you were waiting last night, but I wasn't in the zone for it. But now we're back with this topic, which is a request topic. And the topic is going to be on having Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune all retrograde in the birth chart. So thank you very much for that request. And also, if you're new to my channel, I'm Hinny. My name is Hinny. You can subscribe if you like what I do. And you can give the video a thumbs up as well if you like it. And leave a comment below if you have this particular concoction of retrograde placements. Let me know. And I also want to provide a little trigger warning because this topic does talk a little bit about sort of some of the more common limitations that people with these placements have. So that can be, our personal drawbacks and other sort of limitations. And so some people might find some of them triggering, might talk about some things that touch on mental health, or certain traumas, or certain abusive tendencies. And so just to keep that sort of thing in mind before you get into this video. But first of all, what I'm going to talk about is what are the planets. So this is, of course, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, all retrograde in the birth chart, right? Again, let me know in the comments if you have this particular placement. I would really, really, really love to hear your take, your insight, and your experience. But these planets are all outer planets, so they all move very slowly, and they're also sometimes considered generational planets because they move slowly. So chances are it's very likely that you have the same outer planet placements as someone born in the same year as you. That's why it's generational. And so the effects are said to be like much slower or much more kind of below the surface, or just sort of background sort of energies that affect you on a slower, longer term sort of basis. But the planets individually then, let's start with Saturn. So Saturn, for the longest time, was thought to be the last planet or the furthest planet away in the solar system. And therefore in astrology, it was associated traditionally with ends and sort of cutting things off. And through doing that, creating constraint and limitation. And Saturn is also associated, therefore, or was associated in traditional astrology with sadness or like melancholy or being in isolation and necessary meditation or solitude. And also Saturn had a lot to do with fears as well, fears of the unknown, and being on this sort of interstice as well of the where things are known and where things are not known. So it was this planet, this archetype on that border for the longest of time. And time as well is something that Saturn is very often associated with. So it does have a lot of these sort of serious, heavy sort of connotations. But then later we did discover, of course, Uranus and Neptune. And Uranus then is kind of like almost in many ways a complete opposite of Saturn. It has a lot to do with chaos. So not limitations, but sort of breaking through limitations. So chaos and sort of like lightning strike type stuff, shocks, all that kind of jazz. And Uranus is also associated with, if you think of something like computers, it's like the digital. It's like the computative, the digital, but like on very hyper levels, on very like meta levels. And Uranus is also associated with astrology as well, and sort of the hyper or meta study of systems, or the interaction of systems at the most hyper sort of level. And therefore, Uranus does sometimes get associated with technology, just more generally, and advancement as well, and progress, because there's this sense of breaking through, smashing through. There's a sense of rebellion as well with Uranus. Often that is a connotation. And Uranus is also, it is chaos and change, but that which, of course, creates resistance. And therefore, Uranus is associated with being the oddball archetype, or the oddball planet. And astronomically as well, this is because it does have a really weird way that it tilts on its axis, very differently to the other planets. So there's all that kind of stuff about Uranus. And then if we look at Pluto, sorry, not Pluto, Neptune. So Neptune then is quite often associated with the glamour and the glitz and things like deceit and things that cannot be sort of tangibly grasped, things that cannot be measured or articulated very easily. Neptune is also associated with fantasies and projections and illusions that are sort of captured through screens. So we do get associations with film and photography and sort of arts where there's a lot of image. Poetry as well can easily be associated with Neptune. And although I do believe that actually all planets are magical and all the planets are powerful, Neptune does get more associated commonly with magic and fantasy, more so than the other planets. But what it really is, I think, is that it's more to do with trickery sort of magic, or it's more to do with all that glitters is not gold sort of magic. And it is also to do a lot with the magic of purity and the magic of pure faith in something. And this pure faith is quite necessarily joint with absolute surrender or absolute commitment to something. And so we do get connotations, even though all the planets are magical and powerful and divine, connotations of the divine when we talk about Neptune. Just, I think, because it comes from this discourse of surrender and devotion. It's just like the higher octave of all the other planets and the way that they might be devoted to particular things. Neptune is like very devoted sort of archetype. And then what is a retrograde? So a retrograde, physically, literally speaking, is from Earth's perspective, it looks like a planet is going backwards. It's not really, but it looks like it's going backwards. And astrologically, very generally, we interpret this then as a time for reflection, a time for revisiting, a time for themes, to certain themes and people and ideas and stuff to be brought back to us from the past. And also in general for things to kind of frig up a little bit or trip up a little bit. And the flavors and the particular energies is going to depend on the actual planet that is retrograde, and also even the sign that it's retrograde in. And the house that it's retrograding in for you personally tells you what themes this sort of retrograde energy is going to be engaging with. So let's look at Saturn retrograde first. So if you have Saturn retrograde, by the way, all these, I'm going to sort of list what these 3 planets retrograde mean individually. So what you're going to have to do if you have all 3 of these planets retrograde is combine them all, okay? And you might, it's kind of likely that you actually have them all in the same sign or the same house. Maybe not, but it's likely that you do have them also in the same sign, in the same house, all retrograde together as a stellium. Let me know in the comments if you have that. And also what I want you to do is to check out the signs that you have these retrograde planets in, because that's going to add flavor and more detail than I'm going to provide today. And of course, the house or the houses that you have these retrograde planets, check all of that out as well, because that's going to add the thematic flavors for you. So Saturn retrograde, if you have Saturn retrograde in the birth chart, this is going to give problems with discipline. Problems with discipline, because Saturn is associated with limitations, restrictions, and guarding boundaries as well, or being on the liminal, or being on the interstice of something, and as such, as a kind of guardian, or authority figure or power. And so you might have problems with discipline, problems with controlling your limits. And that can mean anything. When we talk about discipline, it could be like your health, your routines, your self-control when it comes to eating, drinking, whatever the case might be. But discipline in general can be quite a problem for you. And you can also take, by the way, I'm starting with the sort of less desirable things, and then we're going to end this stream with the, well, what can we do about retrogrades? More positive things. So please don't worry. It's not all negative. It's not all bad. But yes, Saturn retrograde can make people, the individual who has this placement, they can take a long time in their life to get stable compared to others who have this direct. They can take a long time to get stable. Lots of hiccups and lots of issues with achieving stability and security. Also, people with this may be deeply melancholic and even depressed. And that might even be clinical for some people, like clinical depression, like diagnosed mental health issues that relate to or include depression. And that's especially possibly sort of increased depending on the sign that you have this. If you have it in Capricorn, for example, it's much more likely that these themes come up for you. Or if you have it in a water sign as well, it's more likely that these themes come up for you, and or that they stay with you longer and linger. Having Saturn retrograde also can mean that the individual's father, their biological father, is away somehow in their life, or that they are defunct somehow, and or that they are limited somehow in the individual's life. And that can mean a million things, but that's the general sort of signature that we find. And Saturn retrograde people can also have poor timing. So timing is very poor. So Saturn is the archetype of time. It is like a time goddess, time god, Saturn. And so problems with time, poor timing. Again, it ties into discipline, but here specifically timing. And finally, people with this Saturn retrograde placement, they might be too reserved as individuals, or too quiet for a lot of their lives, and they might be too private as well. They might really come across as a closed book, especially if this is like in the 12th or the 1st or the 7th houses. They could really seem very closed, reserved, quiet, private. Okay, let's, oh, by the way, I wanted to mention that I am going to be collaborating very soon here on YouTube with another YouTube creator who goes by the name of Alien Creations. So you can go and check out his channel here on YouTube, Alien Creations. And I'm not gonna give too much away, but we're gonna be collaborating. And it is gonna include astrology, this thing that we're doing. So look out for that, stay tuned, and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can find out when we actually upload our very special videos to come. Okay, so let's move on then to Uranus, having Uranus retrograde in the natal chart. So this can give the individual problems with individual expression, because Uranus is about uniqueness or sort of breaking the mold or being a bit quirky, tilted axis sort of energy. But the individual having Uranus retrograde can have issues expressing their uniqueness, expressing their individuality. They can do and they can say abrupt and shocking things, and they can do it at the wrong time quite commonly. Watch out for that. If you have this placement, you can uh, there's like, there's a time and a place, and you often get it wrong when it comes to your expression. You might have problems also breaking free and rebelling when there is cause to do so. So, on the one hand, we have rebelling at the wrong time, and then we also have not rebelling when you need to, and not breaking free when you need to, because Uranus, of course, is associated with breakthroughs and that sort of eureka energy. But yeah, if you have this placement, you might just have issues breaking free out of things, rebelling away from things when actually you need to do that. And people with this placement can often do chaotic things that are sort of hard to go back on or to repair, because Uranus can be this all or nothing sort of power that we have in us, and with all or nothing sort of decisions and actions, we have to be careful because they're often irreversible. But with Uranus retrograde, the individual can often do irreversible things that they might later actually want to reverse, but find it really difficult or impossible to do so. Also, you might hold back too much when you have like a new idea or some sort of rare, unusual ideas. Keep that in mind as well. You might really downplay your creativity. And you can easily fail or be paralyzed in times of crisis, or like you just become like a nervous wreck sometimes, because Uranus deals with crisis as well as breakthrough. So crisis, and with it retrograde, there's often this issue of not being able to cope in crisis, kind of breaking down rather than breaking through. So keep that in mind as well. I've got some lovely green tea. It's quite chilly today, but it's very sunny. Blue November sky. Gorgeous. I hope everyone is keeping well. Again, let me know in the comments if you have one or more of these placements, especially if you have all three retrograde in your birth chart. I want to hear your experience and your story. Neptune retrograde then. So if you have Neptune retrograde in the birth chart, this is quite possibly for the individual deep potential problems with things like gaming, fantasy, and escapism. And for example, you might be the type who falls into like a months long stint of just playing online games and completely abandoning everything like real or responsible in your life. Neptune retrograde people can really, in their early life, maybe in their teens, 20s, 30s, can really suffer from that kind of thing. And it's very severe. It's not just like someone chilling a bit or having a bit of an obsessive stint. It's like it can be very long and very detrimental for the person. Also, Neptune retrograde people can have problems with boundaries, because Neptune is often associated with dissolution. And again, it's kind of similar to surrender. So giving up a lot in order to connect more with the divine, giving up to connect with the divine, giving up to go into other dimensions. This is Neptune as well. So giving up to be freed truly and purely as well. That's Neptune energy. But when it's retrograde for you, you can have problems with boundaries in your relationships, in situations, in your space, just problems of, for example, believing too many people too often as well, because Neptune again deals with fancy and fantasy, and all that glitters is not gold type of lessons. And when you have it retrograde, you could just believe too many people and too easily, and you get tricked or duped a lot of the time, and it's not good. Um, and you can also be intoxicated easily by people. You believe that they are bewitching, or that they are mm, much more magical than they are, or that they are something that they just aren't as well. You can believe that. And also, sometimes people with Neptune retrograde can be too agnostic, or they can just deny as well hope and faith. So remember, Neptune is about complete devotion and allowing yourself to let go and surrender and devote yourself to faith and to high hope, in order to truly connect with the universe and get blessings. But you could just be too agnostic, like you don't believe, like you put yourself in a mm, in a disadvantageous position sometimes because you refuse to believe one thing or another, or you just outright deny the potential and the power and the magic of hope and faith sometimes. Neptune retrograde people should also probably, this is just some advice, avoid alcohol, drugs, and going overboard, or even sometimes doing it more than once a week for these individuals, because things like alcohol can really, really, really affect your system more than others. And drugs, probably with Neptune retrograde, you haven't even tried a drug beyond like alcohol or cigarettes or coffee. Like, maybe you just have always known innately that that's something that can cause you great harm, and it can with Neptune retrograde. Basically, retrogrades present more prolonged setbacks or serious setbacks for the individual throughout their life or in their early stages of life. And so, yeah, possibly individuals with this placement should avoid alcohol, drugs, like take them in small, responsible doses, or even some of you just teetotal, get rid of them altogether. Neptune retrograde people can often glaze over as well, and that can be, again, if this is like in their first house, it can even be physically as individuals in their eyes, their face, they kind of glaze over a lot. But it can also be in the sense of the details. So they glaze and they gloss a lot over the details. They overlook details and important data and information and facts. And that can also make them easily drift off track and go on tangents. And that can be like, especially when they're in mundane things and spaces and situations, like they could just be at work, but they're really glazing over and going off on tangents, and losing focus quite easily. Neptune retrograde people can also suffer from compulsive lying and or like omission of the truth. You know that? Omission of the truth. So watch out for that, because again, Neptune is sometimes deceptive energy. It's where with our power and our magic we can deceive through fantasy, illusions, and just outright beautiful lies, white lies. Deep victim complex is also something that this can present. And this like victim complex can hold you back from healing, especially if you if you are a victim. The complex that develops can stop you from healing. You just keep yourself in that particular space of victimhood, and you find it incredibly difficult to face it and to get through it, or to get help as well. So often with Neptune, we're just throwing ourselves into this huge ocean of, I don't know, so let whatever happens to me happen, that kind of energy. And when it's retrograde, Neptune can severely do this to the individual. And so in terms of victimhood, make sure you're not keeping yourself too much in the keeping other people in the dark or the shadows when it comes to your own victimhood and your actual victimhood, because you might need to actually connect more with the mundane and reality and real people and real resources that can help you process the experiences that you've had as a victim. And finally, people with Neptune retrograde can be easily affected by other people's suffering and can cry a lot, or just be really teary and emotional when they see suffering, when they witness or even just hear about suffering. And this can be like in films as well. They see like suffering in films, in a scene, and it can really easily make them quite sad, maybe even profoundly sad or very affected by that. And so they might be the kind of people who stay away from like sad things, or they only go there sometimes, because it affects them so profoundly, and it can really cause them to jar a bit in their real life, and they can take longer to get over something that to others might have just been nothing like much, um, or just a film, just a scene or a story. But for the Neptune retrograde person, it can be really deep or profound or even hurtful. Yeah, they can really dive into uh, the created pain or created hurt or suffering, and then take it on. Okay, so how do we work with these retrogrades if we have them in our chart, especially these three planets, and if we have them all together? Like, what good can actually come of this? Well, I think actually, personally, retrogrades are amazing. They are. Retrogrades are amazing, but just like when like a planet in real time retrogrades, like Mercury, that's the most common one that people know about. But when a planet goes retrograde in real time, people have a lot of usually negative things to say, or they worry a lot, or there's a lot of warnings and precautions. And I do this as well on my channel sometimes. There's a lot of precaution and scare sort of propaganda. um, and so it's the same as well for when we interpret our own chart or other people's charts, or when we read about retrograde interpretations, there's often this sense of, oh my God, it's bad. It's really bad. It's not good. You don't want a retrograde placement or planet. And if you do, oh my God, I feel sorry for you. You can get a lot of that sort of energy. But actually, they're really good. They can be really good. Just like your direct planet placements can be really good for you, but they can also be really bad for you, direct planets. It's always about your free will with astrology. Your astrology is your set of magic powers, your particular X person powers, but it's up to you, right? As to whether you use them for good, whatever good is to you, or whether you use them for bad and evil, whatever bad and evil is for you, or whether you're kind of in between. So today you're being good, okay, saving old ladies with your powers, and tomorrow, on Sunday Fun Day, you're committing a lot of sin in Vice City. It's like, okay, it's all down to you. Every single day, every single time, and none of us are perfect. Direct or retrograde planets, doesn't matter. So if you have these retrograde planets in your chart, then you get a deep and a very early head start when it comes to these retrograde themes. All these things I kind of listed just now, you get a head start on these things compared to a lot of other people. When everything is direct for them, they might only hit these issues when they're in their late 20s, Saturn return, late 20s, 30s, maybe even later. Hi, if you just tune in, maybe it's only later that they actually meet these themes, and then they're like, oh my frig, like what is going on? I've never had this addiction problem, or I've never experienced this beautiful light person in my life until now. But for you, if you have these retrogrades, possibly from even before you were a teenager, and then all through your teens and into your 20s, then, and maybe it's not until your like late 20s and your Saturn return that you have actually started to really master control over your retrograde placements. Sometimes it's even later for people. If you need help, by the way, with your retrogrades, book a session with me. You can look down in the description below for my details. But I do work sometimes with people on how to deal with retrogrades, especially those of you like in your late 20s, early 30s. But yeah, you get a deep early head start. And also you have just more life experience. that just is what it is. You get more life experience through the shiz, basically, especially with Saturn retrograde, I want to say, because this can have a lot to do with time and having to wait way, way, way longer than others around you, way longer to get like back on par with people of your generation or your family or your circle or your town, whatever. It takes you way longer. And also, if you have these retrogrades, you are going to be able to spot pitfalls quickly, because retrogrades, do involve pitfalls, especially pitfalls that return. They're recurring. It's patterns of pitfall. But it does sometimes take time to consistently avoid them. So keep that in mind again. Again, some people, it's not until their 30s or even beyond that they start to become conscious of their retrograde placements and powers and how to actually get a grip on them. But I think generally you will be able with these retrogrades to spot pitfalls quickly, and that's going to be good for your success and your you're getting a hold on your powers. Also, you can identify and cut detrimental things out of your life easily with retrogrades. So you can identify and cut anything that's kind of detrimental or there to trip you up. You start to learn quite quickly, fairly quickly, how to cut, because you know what it is and you know it's bad. So it can be really easy for you to just dismiss it because it's not needed, right, for you. But this might need you to first admit with retrogrades. You first need to admit and then the magic of these planets for you is recognized. But often retrograde people just neglect or abuse their magic, and so keep that in mind as well. You want to not just surrender to a certain retrograde planet of yours and just be like, oh, this is my fate. No, you can always work with it and work on it. Also, with these retrograde placements, you can easily advise and help and set an example for others. So if you're some kind of coach, teacher, parent, just a great sibling, a great friend, a guide, whatever, having lots of retrogrades probably brings you there or brought you there or made you that person, that particular helpful profession that you become. It probably helped you, these retrogrades. And so you're able to, retrograde energy is kind of like Chiron energy in many ways. You're able to easily advise and help and set example because you've been through a lot of it yourself very early on and very often. You're not just reading it from a book to someone without any sort of emotional, without any empathy or without any actual experience in your body, in your soul, your spirit. Also, with these retrogrades, you have more planning and more reflection time and energy that goes into your life. So you're probably going to be a much bigger and better planner than others, and much more of a reflector, a deep reflector. So if you make a mistake, you are much more likely to ruminate and reflect on it and to try harder next time. And finally, with these retrogrades, blessings in general. So the good, the great, the spiritually growthful, wholesome things that happen to you, you are going to feel them much more profoundly. And the returns, the gains of all your efforts as well are going to be much more cherished by you. So basically, this gives someone who feels blessings, is more grateful for blessings than others. Alrighty, so that's kind of just what I had for these 3 retrograde planets in the birth chart. Again, if you have these in your chart, do let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experience and tell me what signs and houses you have them in, and let's have a little conversation and talk about how you work with your retrograde placements. Alrighty, have a lovely rest of the weekend, and I shall see you very, very soon. Love you. Take care.